All right, here we go. So I'm Rick Lover. Please tweet. I am the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And if I wanted to boil down into a nutshell what the Exchange does, we are 844 need Sci for any writer, producer, director, actor, studio executive making a feature film, a TV show, or a video game in Hollywood. That is my actual phone number, for real. If you dial that number, I will answer it, or someone on the staff at the Exchange. So that's what we do at the Exchange, but it's not really why we do it. And so I tried to think of a few different ways to kind of explain this a bit. And this morning, as I was kind of last minute going through some changes, I happened to maybe make the mistake of Google imaging scientist. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but I think I'm being fair to Google image when I say that this is pretty much what you come up with. And you know, this guy right here, this cartoon guy, I thought was okay, and then I realized he's like selling us poison. So, you know, it's somewhat fair to say that out there in media, this sort of image of scientists may have some issues in terms of the stereotypes. So then I took it a step further, and I tried hero. And this is what I came up with. Some of these you would expect, this unhung hero thing. I'm not really sure how we got to that. And I don't know why George Costanza made the list, but totally. There are definitely some people who deserve to be on this list. But then you can see that there's a good representation of fictional heroes. So this got me to thinking about a recent trip to New York, a conversation I had with a really cutting-edge cognitive neuropsychologist at Mount Sinai named Heather Berlin. And I asked Heather, I said, you know, what was it, can you think, when you think back to being a kid, were there any fictional characters that really got you thinking, I want to be a scientist? And this is what she told me. And so basically, what I've realized, one way to explain what I do or why I do what I do is to try to inspire more Heather Berlins through characters like Wonder Woman, because these are the characters that actually are getting scientists interested in science. So to take a big step back for a second, I work for the National Academy of Sciences. The National Academy of Sciences is one of the most prestigious honorific science organizations in the country. We're founded by Abraham Lincoln 150 years ago. Our bread and butter, what we do is we are an independent voice of peer-reviewed science. So who's our audience? Mostly Congress. We like to say we speak truth to power as a sort of unofficial motto. These are some of our greatest hits. I'll forgive you if you haven't read any of them. And so about 7 years ago, there were some internal meetings at the NAS. This actually predates me being there, but where we were trying to figure out what are some ways that we can take, you know, these reports and bring them to the public at large. And so we had some really out-of-the-box meetings, and some wacky ideas were thrown around. And as happens oftentimes at the National Academy, the conclusion of the meeting was to have another meeting. And so we introduced our president, Ralph Cicerone, to Janet and Jerry Zucker. And through this sort of apples and oranges group, the Science and Entertainment Exchange came into existence. We launched in 2008 in Los Angeles. As you can see, we played the hits as far as speakers on both sides of the aisle, as it were. And then, so we threw this big event, and we just waited for the phone to ring. We sort of set up our 844 hotline and decided to see who would call. And what's kind of amazing is the phone really hasn't stopped ringing since that hotline opened up in 2008. And what I'd like to sort of talk about a little bit is, I think the reason why the phone hasn't stopped ringing is because of some basic philosophy that we abide by as a result of this unique collaboration between science and the entertainment community. So if you're the National Academy of Sciences, it's really easy to kind of come in and say, we really know the science. And to come to Hollywood and say, look, your portrayal of science in Sharknado or whatever film, and point to the depiction of science as problematic. But that's never going to inspire people. We have to come in with the understanding that we can't be the accuracy police. You cannot have a creative conversation by telling people no. Nobody likes to be told what to do in their own job by someone who doesn't do their job. So our philosophy is that story will always trump science, but science can improve on story in a few different ways. This is a quote from one of our board members who, I just really like this idea that you just have to kind of sacrifice some accuracy to just get into the room. So through that philosophy, we've existed now for 6 years, and we've done over 1,000 consults on feature films and video games and TV shows. We had the opportunity to work on Frozen. If you've seen that film, the snow is particularly accurate. I don't know about the talking snowman, but the snow, really accurate. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we've hooked them up with hackers, we've hooked them up with people who work on the interface between human and machines and how eventually we're going to control machines just with our brains in ways we're not already. We've worked on Godzilla. We actually hooked them up with a lot of first responders. That's something I'm going to talk about in a second, but we do a fair amount of interaction with the military. We worked on Big Hero 6. We hooked them up with a theoretical physicist. And even shows like The Good Wife or Criminal Minds, they might call us up to ask questions about, the efficacy of ballistics or of eyewitness testimony, those kinds of interactions. So, on the one hand, we could be that sort of almost like a fact-checking service and be doing really well, But there's this other approach, which is how do we get some of the ideas that we want to express out there into the world? There are certain careers in STEM, computer programming, AI, genetics, healthcare. These are all going to be areas where there are going to be good STEM jobs in the future and where kids just aren't going right now. So how do we share that with the Hollywood community? How do we go into a writer's room and blow a writer's mind and get them to want to write for us, or write an idea that we are excited about? So Hollywood is a giant, organic, interpersonal network. It's how the system works there. So we figured we have to create our own giant interpersonal network. And that's why we do events. We have our salon events, which are in the homes of top-level entertainers. If you have a fabulous living room, I want to bring a top-level scientist in there and have them interact with your friends. They can do a Q&A. It's going to be great, trust me. Panels, the Directors Guild, Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. We've worked with the Writers Guild of America. We've done panels at Caltech. Wherever there's a giant auditorium, we'll bring in a group of scientists who will give you a sort of like a TED Talk, and then we'll do a moderated panel with a writer. Most of those are for writers and producers, directors, industry folks. Tours. If you have a cool lab, I'm in. Let's go for a tour. Let's walk through it. As you can see, there's, we do a lot of work with the military, even like NASCAR. There's a lot of engineering that goes into those cars. There's a lot of science that goes into keeping our troops safe. And, what screenwriter isn't going to take up that opportunity to get on top of a Humvee with a machine gun? So my favorite format is actually kind of similar to Mindshare in some ways, but it's called Science Speakeasy. And what we do in those formats is we get the highest level scientists we can find, I slap a beer in their hand, I say, you have 15 minutes, say something cool. At the end of 15 minutes, we do a Q&A, and our shortest Q&A has gone for an hour. So what's this all add up to? For us, it's about building this community, right? What's the point? Storytellers write what they know. So 80% of people in this country say that they do not know a scientist. And of the remaining 20%, 80% of them are thinking of their doctor when they say they know a scientist. So that's a big problem, Why would a Hollywood screenwriter be any different? If you create this community, you can change the way Hollywood writers go about writing those scientist characters when they create feature films that are going to influence the next generation. So it's more than that, though. For entertainers, we're also providing a service where we help them build the worlds, right? A scientist is used to working within a set of rules and having a creative problem that needs to be solved and needing to find a way to solve that problem without breaking the rules, right? That's screenwriting. It's sort of the same, it's a very similar construct. So there are so many great science communicators out there who can take a system and just tweak it. Okay, well, what if there were no gravity? What happens then? What if it were on fire? And those are the kinds of scientists that we seek out in this program. Now, from a scientist's point of view, the greatest benefit of our program, or one of the great benefits of our program, is the benefit of accidental curriculum. You know, most people, the literature suggests, get most of their information about science and technology from entertainment. It's unfortunate, but true. And when you look into the most recent studies, there's a study out of Princeton that basically says that scientists, while trustworthy, are not very relatable. So if you can engage an audience with a character who you already feel you have a relationship with, it's a known fact that people engage with that science better. So we get into the living room and we reach the public through the characters they know with the science that we want to communicate. So I'm just going to tell you a couple of little stories about stuff that's happened with the exchange. This is one of my favorites. This is a really early story. So one of our first consults was on a movie called Watchmen that came out a few years ago. And there's a professor at University of Minnesota named Jim Kikalios, who's probably, he's a giant, giant comic book nerd. And when we called him up and asked him about consulting on Watchmen, he was like there in a heartbeat. And so he went in and he talked to some of the creatives about why Dr. Manhattan was blue. There's a very specific waveform, there was a lot of heady physics. Frankly, I didn't really understand it. But when the movie came out, he did a really cool thing. He went to the producers and he went to the studio and he said, I'd like to do the physics lesson that I taught the filmmakers and I'd like to put it on YouTube. And so he got the EPK, the little electronic press kit, and he did this video on YouTube and he got 1.8 million views. Now, Jim, because he's this kind of guy, he actually did the math on how many intro-level physics classes he would have to teach in order to get to 1.8 million students. And it lasted several careers. It was well beyond. So that's one outcome. So here's another one. You know, I mentioned our salon events in people's living rooms. So we brought in a company called Esri. They do GIS technology. It's a very, very elaborate mapping technology. And there was a producer in the audience that night who said, you know, I think this mapping technology is really cool. And I run a show called Covert Affairs, and I'd like to learn more. So we brought him down to Esri, and the entire staff from Covert Affairs spent a day there. Now, if you're a fan of this show, Season 3, Episode 3, I don't know if you can read that actually, but Season 3, Episode 3, they save their colleagues from the bad guys using geographic information systems by Esri. So this is the collaboration that I'm most excited for, and I think in a lot of ways the future of the kind of work that we do. So several years ago, creative team at Marvel was developing the film Thor. And if you read the comic books, and I did, the original Jane Foster character was a nurse. And so we brought in a group of scientists. One of the speakers tonight will be talking about a later collaboration as well, Kevin. But we brought in a group of scientists earlier in the development process to talk about the science of Thor. How could, you know, the producers had this really great idea, which was that, you know, any science significantly advanced from the science we know is indistinguishable from magic. But they wanted to know how this truly advanced being might have come down to Earth 1,000 years ago and been perceived as a god, effectively, when it was really an alien. And so a theoretical physicist from Caltech named Sean Carroll said, well, what if you used a wormhole, which you'll learn about
more later. One of the creatives said, "Ugh, wormholes are so 90s. Isn't there some other thing we could use in physics?" And so Sean Carroll said, "Well, how about an Einstein-Rosen bridge? You could use that." And he goes, "Oh, that sounds interesting. What is that?" And Sean Carroll said, "Well, it's a wormhole." So that's how Natalie Portman ended up in a mainstream summer popcorn movie giving a little mini lecture on what an Einstein-Rosen bridge was. And it's also how when the movie came out, when the sequel to the movie came out, Thor 2, Disney called us and they said, "We would be really interested in using this strong female scientist character to do something to engage kids." We created a mentorship initiative. We got several hundred kids to go out into the world, meet a woman in a STEM career, and report back to us on what they learned from that person. From those kids who went out and did this, we selected 10 young girls to come out to LA for a week. They got to walk the red carpet at the Thor premiere. They got to go tour Underwriters Laboratory. They got to do a whole week's worth of really cool activities, and that's a community that endures today. The Moore Foundation is actually helping us to extend this initiative to beyond young girls and hopefully IP in the future. So that's a way that these sorts of interactions can get out into the community and hopefully change lives for underserved kids. So at the end of the day, there's this question, does it work? And I'm about to use a really dubious story. I'm not sure if it's true. Snopes tells me it is not true, but I'm going to run with it. I told you I'm not the accuracy police, so just deal with it. In 1934, it happened one night. Clark Gable took off his shirt in front of Claudette Colbert in a very famous scene. He was not wearing an undershirt. It was scandalous. Apparently, the story goes, the urban legend goes, that men's undershirt sales fell 75% after the release of that movie and did not recover until GIs were issued undershirts as part of their standard issue in World War II. Since that time, feature films have been used to sell everything from cars to perfume. And if you go down to JPL or SpaceX or any lab that's doing something cool and innovative in Southern California, these are the characters you're going to see up on the wall, I guarantee you, and the little action figures on the desks. So why not make this effort and take this opportunity to help shape these characters to create the scientists of the future? Thanks.